Hello, friends. Welcome to NC Families Weekly Update. I'm Sharon Sullivan, joined with Jerry Royal this morning. It's great to see you this morning, Jerry. It's good to be back. Glad to be here.
All right. Missed you. We're glad you're back.
Well, thank you. So while we do have a lot of legislative issues to discuss that's happened over the week, I wondered if you could give us an update on what has transpired with Senate Bill 20, the pro-life bill that was passed earlier this session.
Okay, great. Yeah, actually, almost shortly after we had the update last week, Planned Parenthood and abortionists filed a lawsuit challenging our pro-life law here in North Carolina. And this is what's interesting. I thought it may be helpful, I know it was for me, to all of a sudden realize seeing how all the branches of government are interacting on this specific legislation.
Right.
Of course, the bill was passed, went to the governor, the executive branch, it was vetoed, came back to the legislature. They overrode the governor's veto. Now the court challenged, so the judicial branch is involved. But actually, this is what's interesting. There's already been a response within the legislature. Yesterday, at the very end of the Senate session, they had a bill from the House related to health and human services. And they added an amendment to that bill, which it's called technical corrections. At the end of the session, as you know, Sharon, because you've been involved with the legislative process before, they'll come back at the very end, sometimes have a very long bill that corrects things in various, sometimes, I don't know, there are hundreds of bills that have gone through. There are sometimes grammatical, punctuation changes. In this case, there were some things that needed to be adjusted, which were part of that lawsuit. And so that bill did pass yesterday, second reading in the Senate. They'll vote on it to finalize that next week, and then it'll go to the House for concurrence. So it's interesting how all the branches of government are involved in this, and hopefully what this means, instead of the efforts to stop the enactment of this important pro-life legislation in North Carolina, that some of the questions that were raised in the lawsuit are addressed in this legislative action. So again, all the branches interacting with each other, in this case, hopefully to continue to move forward with this important pro-life law in North Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been one of our babies, something we care so very much about, and we're hopeful that, this will help to iron it out and keep it moving the way we want it to.
Right.
Some positive news this week was the passage of HB 574, the Fairness in Women's Sports Act.
Right.
This legislation, both chambers had drafted companion bills, and the House version ultimately passed. Could you give us an update on what that final bill actually looks like?
Yes, I will. The biggest distinction between the two, and of course the point of this legislation was like it says, fairness in women's sports, having only biological women competing against biological women and biological males competing only against biological males.
Right.
The difference in the House and Senate version, the House version included collegiate sports. Senate version didn't. The Senate ended up taking the House bill and passing it with minor change. So that was finalized this week. So that's more good news.
Right. Excellent news. And, obviously one of the loudest voices on that has been Riley Gaines as to why it's so important to be involved in the college sports. And we're very pleased to be able to cover women in all ages and making sure they're still getting their scholarships and that their hard work is paying off.
Exactly.
So that was great news.
Quick side note on that. I know in her testimony, it was very compelling. She didn't just look at the athletic aspect of it. Sadly, it part of what became a problem was what happened in the locker room. So there's also the issue of privacy. That's one more important area that's going to be protected under this legislation.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Very excited about that.
Right.
I mean, that goes back to some other issues we've had in years past, so that's very good.
Right.
Also this week, there's been some movement with Senate Bill 49, the Parents' Bill of Rights. It's passed the Senate and is now making its way through the House. The bill, of course, gives parents the right to know about their child's physical and mental health, among other things. And can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of what this law does is clarify what the existing law is. I mean, North Carolina Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, all have said that the parents have a fundamental right to determine the care, custody and control of their children.
Right.
That includes what happens to them in education.
Yes.
Right now, there's some concerns about, in some areas, what's happening in education. So what this bill does says parents have a right to see the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
They have a right to know what's, as you say, going on with the physical and mental health of their children. Issues like, of course, if there's a physical issue, but then if there's a mental, psychological issue where the child's struggling, in some cases where they say they want to identify differently
Mm-hmm.
in the school from who they are, different name, that parents need to know about this.
Right.
So they can help and walk with their children through these times.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get too much in the debate, but some people are going, well, parents might react wrongly. Well, no, parents are the ones who love and care for their children. And if they are reacting wrongly, our law recognizes that fundamental right doesn't apply if there's abuse or neglect.
Right.
That's where the law does step in. So this, again, it's important. The House is moving on the Senate passed bill.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that will continue to move.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And this leads us very easily, actually, into the issue of the gender bills, which are currently being looked at in the legislature. Can you help us sort out where we stand in regards to these bills? Because they've been complicated and there's been some changes and they've been going back and forth between both chambers. So where are we today?
Well, it's a good question. It's, again, how the legislative process works when you have two different chambers. Mm-hmm. They started out basically with House and Senate version that were almost identical. Now there have been some changes. The House this past week passed a version of the bill that, and again, I guess to back up a little bit and say what the bills say, they're addressing the issue today of what is happening with procedures for minors as far as gender transition. Mm-hmm. And so what both bills do say is that the procedures would not be allowed for minors, whether chemical or surgical. Mm-hmm. And then this is another part of it. I mean, as far as prohibiting that, it's where there's state funding that would be applied. Mm-hmm. So basically saying that wouldn't be allowed would cover a whole lot of this. So those similarities are there, but the difference is who the provisions would apply to. And the House version that was passed this week would apply, the way they describe it, as public health facilities, and that's defined in the statute as any facility within the UNC health system or Health and Human Services. Mm-hmm. The Senate version is much more comprehensive. It covers all health care providers, would be prohibited. And one thing my mind I know was kind of skipping out that I wanted to share is part of what we have shared, because you and I both have testified in committees about this. Mm-hmm. And this one statement from the American College of Pediatricians, I think, helps people understand the importance of this, because we all know some of these things that are happening are permanent. Right. Things that are happening to young people, to minors, mm-hmm. that will affect them the rest of their life. And so it's like any medical procedure. What's the basis for doing this? American College of Pediatricians says there is not a single long-term study to demonstrate the safety or efficacy of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for transgender-believing youth. Moreover, the best long-term evidence we have among adults shows that medical intervention fails to reduce suicide. So we all are concerned about what we hear is happening, mm-hmm. and know that this needs to be addressed. And the reason, I know, Sharon, you mentioned about parental rights. Some of the debate, they've said, well, wait a minute, on one hand, we're saying parents have a right, which they do, to determine the care, custody, and control of their children. Right. In this case, we're seeing these are tremendous, sometimes permanent harms. That doesn't fit under normal parental rights. Mm-hmm. You don't have a right as a parent to cause something to happen in your child's life that's going to bring that kind of harm to them. And
I would add, too, that we did have a woman testify who said that in the doctor's office, her parents were manipulated, so to speak, by the doctor saying, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live boy, meaning that if you don't proceed with this procedure, you're likely going to lose your child to suicide. So evidence is not really supporting that. And also it's a manipulation of a parent's love for their child. So we need to get this ironed out and make sure that we're taking care of these kids in spite of their parents' fear, you know, and, we all love our children. We do anything to protect them most of the time, but we need to make sure we're looking out for their long-term benefits.
Exactly. So that, as I know, as we've shared with you before, this is an important issue. Right now, as we say, the House has passed one version. The Senate version is much stronger. It actually also includes conscience protection for healthcare providers for all ages of patients. They can't be forced to do procedures that they believe are wrong and harmful.
Right.
So please contact your members of the state Senate to encourage them to pass that version of this bill.
Right.
We're hopeful that that will be what eventually happens. Again, to reinforce the importance of what you all are doing in contacting legislators. The pro-life legislation, that was a big part of how that moved through.
Yes.
The marijuana legislation, why that now is being held back because of the strong opposition, and members have said they're hearing from their people at home. Please continue, to work with us on that. And then also, we mentioned the Parents' Bill of Rights that the House is now considering. Please encourage your House members to support that legislation.
Yes, we can't do this without you and without your help, and of course, with God. So we ask that you would not only just call, but also pray for us and everything that we're trying to get done before the end of this session.
Exactly, because this is a busy time, a lot of things happening. So please continue to work together, and as we most importantly pray together that God will work in the hearts and minds of our elected officials to do what's right and best for our citizens. Thank y'all.
Thank you.